At the heart of Fleet Week celebration, they saw a woman in a faded seal hoodie and a tattoo she couldn't possibly have earned. They were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. Fleet Week in San Diego was a city set ablaze with patriotic fervor. The waterfront, usually a placid stretch of blue and green, was a riot of sound and color. Steel gray hulls of Navy destroyers and cruisers lined the marina, their flags, a constellation of stars and stripes, snapping sharply in the salty Pacific breeze. The air was a thick cocktail of scents, the sweet, greasy perfume of funnel cakes and hot pretzels, the tang of salt water, the chemical sharpness of sunscreen, and the faint, lingering taste of jet fuel from the morning's Blue Angels flyover that had rattled windows and thrilled crowds. Children, their faces sticky with ice cream and cotton candy, darted like hummingbirds between the legs of adults. Sailors in their immaculate dress whites and Marines in their sharp dress blues were the stars of the show, posing for photos, shaking hands, and sharing good-natured laughs with an adoring public. It was a day built for celebration, a living postcard of American naval power and community spirit. And yet, amidst the pageantry and joyous chaos, one figure stood out by her profound stillness. Ava Thorne was a ghost at the feast. She leaned against a thick mooring post at the edge of the boardwalk, half swallowed by its shadow. A charcoal gray hoodie, washed so many times that it softened to the color of storm cloud, was pulled low over her head. Across the chest, in bold, cracked letters, were the words Navy SEALs. It was the kind of apparel you could buy at any tourist trap, but this one was different. It was worn not with tourist pride, but with the familiarity of a second skin, faded and frayed as if it had weathered years of harsh sun and harsher memories. But it wasn't the hoodie that drew the eye. It was the ink. On her left forearm, partially obscured by the sleeve, was a tattoo of a trident. It wasn't large or ostentatious, but it was etched with a chilling precision. The lines were fine, the details intricate. A trident wrapped by a silent owl, its talons clutching a small, almost hidden omega symbol. In the intermittent flashes of sunlight, the ink seemed to shimmer, a dark sigil against her pale skin. It spoke not of decoration, but of dedication, of something earned in places far from the sunlit boardwalk. Ava didn't look like the sailors laughing in boisterous groups or the families admiring the massive ships. Her posture was a study in controlled energy, a coiled spring of vigilance. Her eyes, the color of a lake just before a storm, were fixed not on the spectacle around her, but far out on the water. She wasn't watching the fleet. She was watching one specific ship, the USS Vigilance, a guided missile destroyer moored at the farthest end of the pier. She was waiting for something or someone that no one else could see. Marcus Cole saw her first. His gaze, professionally trained to spot anomalies, swept the crowd with restless energy. A former SEAL from Team 3, Marcus now ran a private security consultancy. A close encounter with an IED in Afghanistan had left him with a knee full of metal and a permanent limp, forcing him into a civilian life he still hadn't fully accepted. That experience had also instilled in him a visceral, almost violent intolerance for stolen valor. He'd seen too many good men die to stomach phonies parading around in unearned symbols. His eyes snagged on Ava's forearm, his brow furrowed. He'd seen dozens of fake SEAL tattoos, badly drawn, poorly placed, always missing the subtle details that mattered. But this one was different. The precision of the owl, the specific curvature of the trident's prongs, the placement of the omega, it sent a jolt of unease through him. It was too perfect, too correct. He began a slow, meandering path toward her, pretending to admire the view. From 10 feet away, the details became even clearer. Something about it gnawed at him, a flicker of a memory from a classified briefing long ago about a unit that officially never existed. He dismissed it. That was impossible. He approached, his voice casual but firm. "That's a nice hoodie. You serve." Ava didn't turn. She didn't even seem to register his presence. Her focus remained locked on the USS Vigilance. Her stillness was not ignorance. It was a deliberate, calculated wall of indifference. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He'd met quiet operators before, men who carried the weight of their work in their silence. But this was something else. This was the stillness of a predator, not a tourist. His initial curiosity curdled into suspicion, then hardened into a sense of duty. This woman was a fraud, and a convincing one at that. He couldn't let it stand. Not here. Not during Fleet Week. He turned away, his limp more pronounced as he moved with renewed purpose. He spotted two uniformed military police officers managing the flow of the crowd near the gangway of a cruiser. Corporal Davies and Private First Class Riley, both young, sharp, and looking for something more exciting than directing traffic. Marcus approached them, his credentials already in hand. He spoke in low, clipped tones, pointing discreetly toward the solitary figure by the mooring post. He explained his background, his certainty, and his concern. The two MPs exchanged a look. Stolen Valor cases were a headache, but a report from a verified SEAL veteran? That was something they had to act on. Immediately, Corporal Davies and PFC Riley moved with the practiced efficiency of their training. They didn't rush, which would have drawn unnecessary attention, but approached Ava from opposite sides, their polished boots making a sharp, rhythmic clicking on the wooden planks of the pier. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the celebration, a metronome marking the end of Ava's quiet vigil. "Ma'am," Corporal Davies said, his voice polite but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. He was the taller of the two, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. "Can we speak with you for a moment?" Ava finally moved. She turned her head slowly, just enough to meet his eyes. There was no surprise in her expression, no fear, no confusion, just a calm, almost weary acknowledgement, as if she had been expecting them all along. This disarmed Davies more than any protest could have. "We've had a report," PFC Riley began, stepping into her line of sight. He was younger, his eagerness barely concealed. "A report that you may be impersonating military personnel." The official tone and the presence of uniforms began to attract attention. A small bubble of silence formed around them as the nearby crowd's cheerful chatter died down. People turned to look, their curiosity piqued. A few phones were discreetly raised, their lenses winking in the sun. Ava said nothing. Her silence was a vacuum, forcing the MPs to fill it. Davies gestured toward her left arm. "That tattoo, ma'am. The trident. Where did you get it?" No answer. Her gaze drifted past him, back toward the distant form of the USS Vigilance. Her expression was unreadable, a placid mask that betrayed nothing. "Ma'am, I need you to answer the question," Davies repeated, his tone hardening slightly. "You got any ID?" Riley interjected, trying a different tack. Without a word, Ava reached into the deep pocket of her hoodie. For a tense second, the MP's hands hovered near their sidearms. But she moved with a slow, deliberate grace, pulling out a worn leather wallet. She handed it to Davies. He flipped it open. Inside was a California driver's license. The name read Ava Thorne. The photo was a perfect match. The same steady eyes, the same impassive expression. There was no military ID, no VA card, no proof of service whatsoever. Just a driver's license, a few credit cards, and a crumpled $20 bill. Davies and Riley exchanged another look. This was it, the confirmation they needed. "Ma'am, based on the report and your lack of military identification, we're going to have to ask you to come with us," Davies said, his voice now formal and resolute. The murmur in the growing crowd swelled. The words "stolen valor" rippled through the onlookers, sharp and accusatory. "Disgraceful," a man in a veteran's cap muttered. A young boy tugged on his father's sleeve, asking what the lady did wrong. The circle of spectators tightened, a ring of judgment closing in. Ava didn't argue. She didn't resist. As Corporal Davies produced a pair of handcuffs, she simply turned and offered her wrists. The metallic click-clack of the cuffs locking into place was unnervingly loud in the sudden quiet. Her eyes flicked one last time toward the USS Vigilance, a final, silent message sent across the water. Then she turned and allowed the MPs to guide her away from the pier toward a waiting patrol vehicle parked just beyond the main thoroughfare. From the edge of the crowd, Marcus Cole watched, his arms crossed over his chest. He felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Justice had been served, but beneath it, a sliver of unease remained. Her composure was all wrong. In his experience, imposters, when caught, either crumbled into apologies or exploded into indignant, blustering lies. They were loud. They were messy. This woman, Ava Thorne, was neither. She moved with a kind of serene acceptance, as if this arrest was not an unforeseen consequence, but a calculated step in a plan he couldn't begin to fathom. As the MPs guided her into the back of the vehicle, a woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, "She doesn't even look scared." Marcus glanced back toward the marina. The great ships sat silent and majestic under the afternoon sun, their flags snapping smartly. Somewhere far above, a jet roared overhead, its sound momentarily drowning out the slam of the vehicle door and the shuffle of boots on asphalt. And in that brief, thunderous moment, though no one on that pier could possibly have known it, the gears of a much larger, much more dangerous story had just been set in motion. The interrogation room at the base's security detachment was a sterile, windowless box designed to suffocate hope. The air, thick and still, hummed with the incessant buzz of fluorescent lights and smelled of stale coffee and the faint, metallic tang of an overworked air conditioning unit. A heavy steel table, its surface scarred with the ghosts of countless elbows, pens, and coffee mugs, dominated the center of the room. On one side sat Ava Thorne. The cuffs were now secured to a ring bolted to the table, her gray hoodie rumpled from the walk. On the other side sat Chief Warrant Officer Evans, a man built like a filing cabinet, broad, solid, with graying hair cut to regulation shortness. He was a man who had seen it all and was impressed by none of it. Ava's wallet lay open on the table, its contents spread out like a pathetic, miniature biography. The driver's license, a couple of grocery store reward cards, and $48 in mixed bills. The absence of a military ID was a gaping hole in the narrative. Evans leaned forward, resting his thick forearms on the cool metal. Ava Thorne, age 30. No record of military service anywhere in the system. Not Army, not Air Force, and definitely not Navy. So, you want to start by telling me why you're wearing a SEAL hoodie and sporting a trident tattoo you didn't earn? Ava's gaze remained fixed on the far corner of the room, as if she could see right through the cinder block walls to somewhere far beyond. Her silence was profound, a stark contrast to the buzzing lights. "This isn't a joke, Ms. Thorne," Evans said, his tone sharpening. "Stolen valor is a federal offense. We have a sworn statement from a decorated veteran. We can make this very, very unpleasant for you." Still nothing. Evans tapped a thick finger against the table for emphasis. "That tattoo," he gestured toward her forearm. "Do you have any idea what that symbol means? The blood and sacrifice it represents? It's not a fashion statement. You have to earn it. And the men who earn it, they don't sit there like you are right now, pretending they can't hear me." Finally, Ava turned her head. Her eyes, slow and deliberate, met his. They were steady, unblinking, and held a chill that had nothing to do with the room's air conditioning. She didn't speak, but for the first time, Evans felt a faint, prickling sense of unease crawl up the back of his neck. He'd interrogated hardened criminals who showed more emotion. From the corner of the room, a young technician named Torres was snapping photos of the tattoo from different angles with a high-resolution digital camera. "We'll run it through the national database, Chief," Torres muttered, more to himself than to Evans. "Probably some Pinterest knockoff or a design she stole from the internet." Evans smirked, recovering his composure. "Yeah, we'll see. Get a good shot of the detail. I want to be able to match it to the cheap online sticker she probably bought it from." The camera's shutter clicked twice more. Torres, satisfied, straightened up. "I'll email these to Verification Command right now." As the door closed behind Torres, the hum of the lights seemed to grow louder, filling the void left by his departure. Evans leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "You're not doing yourself any favors, you know. This silent treatment isn't going to make the problem disappear." A flicker of movement at Ava's lips. It wasn't a smile, not quite. It was something smaller, more knowing. Evans frowned. What's so funny? Her voice, when it finally came, was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear it. It was raspy, as if from disuse. "You've already made the call." The words hung in the air. "What call?" Evans asked, genuinely confused. She didn't elaborate, her eyes drifting back to that empty corner of the room, her brief moment of engagement over. Before Evans could press her further, the door swung open again. It was Torres. He was back far too quickly, and his usual relaxed, almost sloppy posture was gone. His shoulders were rigid, his face pale. "Chief," Torres said, his voice tight. Verification flagged it. They said it's an unusual design. Evans raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" "A good fake." Torres hesitated, swallowing hard. "No, Chief. They're escalating it. They said to hold her here. They said not to ask her any more questions until someone comes down." A cold knot began to form in Evans's stomach. "Who? Who's coming down?" Torres wouldn't meet his eyes. "Sir, they didn't say who. Just someone high up." Evans's frown deepened. This was wrong. All wrong. Stolen Valor cases were routine. They didn't get high-up attention. You filed the report, you got a statement, maybe a JAG officer weighed in. You didn't get called for verification command that made your technicians look like they'd seen a ghost. He glanced back at Ava. She had leaned back slightly in her chair, the cuffs clinking softly. Her eyes finally settled on him, and this time, she offered a small, genuine smile. It wasn't mocking. It was something far more unsettling. It was knowing. Chief Warrant Officer Evans pushed back from the table with a screech of metal on linoleum and stepped into the hallway, pulling a bewildered Torres with him. He shut the interrogation room door firmly, though he knew the one-way glass was still an open eye. "All right, Torres, what the hell is going on?" Evans demanded, keeping his voice low and harsh. "Talk to me. Now." Torres shook his head, running a clammy hand through his hair. "I don't know, Chief. I swear. I sent the photos just like I've done 100 times. Standard procedure." 30 seconds later, not an email, a call. A direct, encrypted call from a number I didn't recognize, but the system identified it as coming from Naval Command Headquarters. And Evans pressed, his patience wearing thin. The guy on the line, he didn't give a name or rank. He just said, and I quote, "Cease all questioning of the detainee. Secure her in place. Await arrival." He told me not to let anyone else talk to her until, and this was his exact phrase, "he arrives." Evans repeated, the word tasting strange in his mouth. "He who?" Torres's voice dropped to a near whisper. He didn't say a name, Chief, but his tone the authority. I think they meant the general. Evans stared at him, a wave of cold dread washing over him. The general? 4-star General Harrison Vance, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The man was a living legend, a figure who appeared on television and at international summits, not in the dingy security offices of a naval base. Generals' visits were for commissioning warships and hosting foreign dignitaries, not for dealing with a quiet woman in a faded hoodie accused of faking a tattoo. The idea was so absurd it bordered on insane. "You're jumping to conclusions, Torres," Evans said, though his own heart was starting to hammer against his ribs. "It could be anyone. A captain, an investigator from D.C. "No, Chief," Torres insisted, his eyes wide with a certainty that chilled Evans to the bone. "You didn't hear his voice. This wasn't a captain. This was someone who doesn't get told no. Ever." Back in the room, Ava had shifted her attention to her cuffed hands. She was absently turning her wrists, testing the weight and fit of the steel cuffs as if they were a new pair of gloves. She wasn't restless or anxious. She was waiting. It was the patient, focused stillness of a sniper in a hide, waiting for a target to appear in the crosshairs. Evans re-entered the room, trying to project a calm he was far from feeling. He sat down again, attempting a casual tone. "Looks like you've got friends in high places, Miss Thorne." She didn't rise to the bait. "You care to explain," he tried again, "why a 4-star general might be interested in your little stunt?" Her eyes, clear and cold as ice, flicked up to lock on his. "It's not a stunt." That was all she said, but the words carried an authority that cut through the fluorescent hum and silenced him completely. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the interrogator. He was the placeholder, a glorified babysitter waiting for the real players to arrive. The minutes stretched into an hour. The silence in the room was thick and heavy. Torres came back twice, each time with the same report. He's on his way. Evan spent most of that hour trying to formulate a theory that made sense. Was she the estranged daughter of a senator? A foreign spy with incredible connections? A high-stakes con artist who had finally overplayed her hand? None of it fit. The sound from the corridor outside began to change. The usual low hum of activity was replaced by a more urgent energy. Quick, heavy footsteps, hushed radio chatter, and the distant, powerful thrum of an approaching convoy of black vehicles. Evans glanced at the clock on the wall. Whoever was coming had made impossibly good time. Inside the room, Ava subtly straightened her posture. Her shoulders settled, her spine aligned. It was a small, almost imperceptible shift, but it transformed her. She was no longer a civilian slouching in a chair. It was the posture of readiness, of someone trained to move with speed and lethal purpose. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't Torres. It was a young, sharp-eyed lieutenant who looked like he had been carved from marble. He stood stiffly at the threshold and simply announced, "He's here." Evans rose instinctively. "Who's he?" The lieutenant didn't answer. He just stepped aside, holding the door open as if for royalty. The sound of heavy, measured boot steps on the tile floor grew louder, each step steady and unhurried. Ava's expression didn't change, but her gaze sharpened, a flicker of light in their stormy depths. The long-anticipated moment had finally arrived. And then, the man himself stepped through the doorway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his immaculate dress whites adorned with rows of ribbons that told the story of a lifetime of war. He carried with him an aura of absolute command, a presence so powerful it seemed to suck the very air from the room. General Harrison Vance. And he was not looking at Chief Warrant Officer Evans. His eyes were fixed solely on the woman cuffed to the table. General Harrison Vance was in his sprawling office overlooking Coronado Bay, halfway through a classified readiness report on carrier strike group deployments, when his aide, a crisp and efficient young captain, knocked once. The knock was urgent. "Sir, verification command is on the line. They say it's priority 1, the aide said. Vance barely looked up from the document, its pages filled with acronyms and logistics. "Tell them to email the summary." "I'm busy. They say it's about a trident tattoo, sir," the aide pressed, knowing he was pushing his luck. A non-standard variant. That got his attention. Verification command handled petty fraud and routine security checks. Fake IDs, stolen medals, the occasional fool wearing surplus gear to get a free drink. A tattoo, no matter how unusual, should never have reached his desk. It was like the Supreme Court being asked to rule on a parking ticket. He took the offered phone. "This is Vance," he said, his voice low and gravelly. On the other end, a verification officer's voice was tight with a mixture of awe and terror. "Sir, we've just received photographic evidence of a trident design from the San Diego base. But it's not a public variation. This one, sir, it includes the Omega mark." Vance's pen froze mid-signature. The Omega mark. The words struck him like a physical blow. It wasn't just non-standard, it was a ghost. It wasn't in any official database, not even in the most classified SEAL archives accessible to the public. It was a symbol only a handful of living people had ever seen, a secret buried so deep that most of the Pentagon had no idea it ever existed. "Repeat that, officer," Vance commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Confirmed, sir." The Omega mark, integrated with an owl motif. Ink placement and estimated age match the documented coordinates and timeline. "Sir, whoever has this tattoo didn't get it from a photograph. It's authentic." Vance's mind, a finely tuned machine of strategy and memory, spun backwards through the years. The Omega mark had been awarded to only one unit, the Night Owl unit, a Black Ops team so far off the books it was a myth within a community of myths. Officially, it had never operated. Unofficially, it had executed missions in places so hostile they were barely acknowledged on maps, let alone in government briefings. And when the unit was abruptly dissolved after a disastrous operation in Somalia, every trace of its existence, every file, every commendation, every name had been scrubbed from the records. Every trace, except for that indelible, undeniable tattoo. How old is the ink? Vance asked, his mind racing. Forensics estimates 5 to 7 years. Based on the fade and skin absorption, sir, the voice replied. General, the person in question is a female civilian, currently detained at the San Diego Naval Base on suspicion of stolen Valor. The MPs cuffed her at the Fleet Week Marina not 2 hours ago. Vance said sharply. The word hung in the air. Yes, sir. Female, Caucasian. Name is Ava Thorne. That name. It landed in his mind like a ghost he hadn't dared to summon in years. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, staring at the ceiling for a single, long heartbeat before his decision crystallized. Secure her, he commanded, his voice like cracking ice. No more questions. No processing. No photographs beyond what you've already taken. I am coming there myself. Personally. Yes, sir. Should we inform? Vance cut him off. No one else talks to her until I arrive. No one. An officer, if anyone, I don't care if it's the Secretary of the Navy himself, tries to override that order, you call my personal line directly. Do you understand me? Understood, General. The line went dead. Vance stood, his movements precise and economical, and buttoned his jacket. His aide watched him with wide, curious eyes. Sir, get the car, Vance said simply. Now! Within minutes, his heavily armed convoy was gliding across the iconic Coronado Bridge. The general stared out at the sweeping expanse of San Diego Bay, at the warships rocking gently at their anchors, their gray hulls glinting in the afternoon sun. To anyone else, it was a perfect postcard day. But Vance's thoughts were not on the water. They were in the dust and chaos of Mogadishu. He remembered Ava Thorne, not in perfect photographic detail, but in flashes of memory, sharp and visceral. A chaotic night operation on the city's outskirts. The snap and crackle of gunfire echoing over rooftops. A team moving through narrow, trash-strewn alleys with the fluid precision of a ghost unit. And among them, Ava, code name Nightingale, half the size of the hulking operators around her, yet moving like she had been born in those lethal shadows. That mission had gone sideways. Horribly sideways. 2 men lost. Extraction delayed by hours of brutal, close-quarters fighting. By the time they had reached the safe zone, the unit's fate had already been sealed by men in air-conditioned offices thousands of miles away. Night Owl had been scattered to the winds. Identities scrubbed, files locked away in digital vaults so secure that even Vance himself had trouble accessing them. He had been briefed in no uncertain terms, never to contact any former members unless it was a matter of absolute, critical necessity. Apparently, today qualified. The convoy rolled through the base gates without slowing, a silent, powerful procession that drew stares and salutes. Admirals and generals didn't just show up unannounced, especially not at a small security detachment office. Inside, Chief Warrant Officer Evans stood by the door of the interrogation room, his posture ramrod straight. Torres hovered nearby, trying to look busy but failing miserably. "She's inside, General," Vance asked, his voice leaving no room for pleasantries. "Yes, sir," Evans managed to say. "We were just... Good. Don't finish that sentence," Vance said, brushing past him as if he were a piece of furniture. He stepped into the room, and for a moment, the only sound was the low, oppressive hum of the overhead lights. Ava sat exactly as described, cuffed to the table, her gray hoodie a stark contrast to the sterile environment. Her eyes, cool and steady, lifted to meet his. The years had added fine lines around them, but the alert, intelligent stillness within was the same. Vance closed the door behind him, letting it latch with a soft, final click. "Ava," he said. It wasn't a question. Her eyes, which had been locked on his, showed no surprise, only recognition. "General," she replied, her voice quiet but clear. General Vance took the seat directly across from Ava, the same one Chief Warrant Officer Evans had occupied just moments before. He placed his formal cap, with its cluster of 4 silver stars, squarely in the center of the steel table. The act was deliberate, a claim of territory. He didn't glance at Evans or the other MPs who were now crowded around the narrow observation window. Their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. His entire world, at that moment, had shrunk to the confines of this small, windowless room and the woman sitting opposite him. His gaze dropped to her left forearm, to the ink that had set this extraordinary chain of events in motion. The trident, the owl, the omega. It was all there, just as the terrified officer on the phone had described. He reached forward, his movement slow and measured, and gently took her arm. His touch was firm but respectful. He rotated her wrist, angling it into the harsh fluorescent light. The omega mark was clear as day. Its edges had softened just enough with time to confirm its age, its authenticity. It was a brand, a piece of a forgotten history that was now sitting undeniable in a San Diego interrogation room. "That tattoo is real," Vance said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words, spoken with his quiet, unshakable authority, landed with the force of a battering ram. They shattered the very foundation of the situation. They changed the air in the room, charging it with a new, dangerous electricity. Standing just behind him, Chief Evans shifted uncomfortably, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He felt a sudden, sickening lurch in his stomach as the full gravity of his earlier interrogation, his smug accusations and threats, crashed down upon him. He hadn't just detained a civilian. He had cuffed a ghost, a living relic from a world he wasn't even cleared to know existed. Ava's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. It was a sad, tired smile. "You told me I'd never have to use it again," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Circumstances change," Vance replied, his eyes still locked on the tattoo, on the past it represented. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the lights seemed to amplify, filling a silence heavy with unspoken history. Then, without turning his head, Vance spoke to the room at large, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Unlock the cuffs." Evans hesitated. It was only for half a second, a brief, reflexive pause born of bureaucratic procedure and shock. But it was half a second too long. Vance's head snapped up, his gaze shifting from Ava to the observation window. His voice, though still low, was now laced with steel. "Chief, now." The command was absolute. The key rattled in Evans's trembling hand as he fumbled with the lock. The metallic click of the cuffs releasing was the loudest sound anyone had heard all day. Ava pulled her hands back, rubbing her wrists once, a simple, human gesture that seemed strangely out of place. She then folded her hands neatly on the table, her posture calm and composed. Vance leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower, a conspiratorial whisper meant only for her. "We need to talk. Alone." Ava nodded once, the smallest of acknowledgments. As Vance stood, he cast a sharp, dismissive glance toward the observation window. "Clear the room and the hallway. I want this entire wing sealed. No one in or out without my direct authorization." The order sent a ripple of frantic activity through the security office. When the door finally closed behind the last scurrying MP, sealing them in privacy, Vance let out a long, slow exhale. It was the sound of a man bracing himself for a storm he knew was coming. He sat back down, the weight of his rank, of his history, settling heavily on his shoulders. "What happened, Ava?" he asked, the formality of her surname gone, replaced by a shared, unspoken past. "Why now?" Her eyes, clear and direct, stayed locked on his. "You already know the answer to that, General. The real question is, what are you going to do about it?" The interrogation room, now a sanctuary sealed by the General's command, felt different. The oppressive atmosphere had been replaced by a tense, charged intimacy. The hum of the lights was no longer a sound of institutional monotony, but the low thrum of a secret being brought back to life. "Start from the beginning," Vance said, his voice calm but insistent. "Why Fleet Week? Why this ship? Why let yourself be arrested? There were 100 other ways to contact me. None of them were as fast," Ava countered, her voice steady. and none of them would have been as clean. No electronic trail. No intermediaries. Just a direct, undeniable signal that only a handful of people would understand. She leaned forward, her composure finally cracking just enough to reveal the urgency beneath. I'm here because of him. Michael. Codename Hello. Vance's expression tightened. He remembered Michael Hello Vance, no relation, a former Air Force pararescueman attached to the Night Owl unit. A brilliant medic and a steady hand under fire. What about him? He's on the USS Vigilance, Ava said. After the unit was dissolved, they buried him in a new identity, just like me. He's a chief petty officer now, a medical specialist. He's been quiet for 7 years. Last week, I received a message. She described the message, a single, untraceable text containing a string of numbers. It wasn't a code they had ever used, but it was a sequence she recognized instantly. The grid coordinates of their disastrous final mission in Somalia, followed by the hull number of the Vigilance. It was a distress call, a warning flare fired from the past into the present. It means he's been compromised. Ava stated, the conclusion stark and unavoidable. Someone found him. And if they found him, they're coming for the rest of us. For me, Vance processed the information, his mind a whirlwind of strategic calculations. Who is they? The hostiles from that op are long dead or imprisoned. It's not them, Ava said, her eyes darkening. It was never them. The mission in Somalia wasn't just a failure, General. It was a setup. We were sent in to retrieve a high-value target, but our intel was bad. The enemy knew our exact insertion point, our numbers, our objective. Someone on our side fed them the information. This was the theory Vance had harbored for years, a cold, ugly suspicion he had never dared to voice. To hear it confirmed by someone who had been on the ground was like a punch to the gut. I came here to warn you, Ava continued, her voice gaining intensity. And to get to Michael before they do. I knew appearing at Fleet Week, near his ship, wearing this, she gestured to her tattoo, would trigger an alert. I counted on some old-timer recognizing the ink, or at least its quality. I counted on the system flagging it. And I counted on that flag reaching you. Getting arrested wasn't the risk, it was the plan. It was the only way to bypass the layers of bureaucracy and get your attention before it was too late. It was an audacious, incredibly risky gambit, a plan that relied on the predictability of the very system designed to erase her. Vance felt a surge of admiration for her cold, calculated courage, the same courage he had witnessed in the dusty alleys of Mogadishu. The person who betrayed the unit back then, Vance said, thinking aloud, they must still be in a position of power, someone high enough to bury the truth and hunt down the survivors. Someone who would see my reappearance not as a ghost from the past, but as a direct threat to their present. Ava finished for him. They'll want to silence me, and Michael, permanently. That's why I couldn't just walk onto his ship. I'm a walking target. My presence here, under your protection, is the only thing keeping me alive right now. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and perfectly logical. Ava hadn't come to him for rescue. She had come to him to sound an alarm, to warn him that a war he thought was long over was about to reignite, this time not in a foreign desert, but within the very command structure he led. He stood up, his decision made. You did the right thing. But you're right, you're exposed. And so is he. He walked to the door, his hand resting on the handle. Stay here. Don't talk to anyone. I'm going to make a call. We need to get Hello off that ship. General Vance strode through the now silent corridors of the security wing, his mind racing. The building felt different, the familiar hallways now laced with a potential threat. Every passing officer, every closed door could be hiding an enemy. He needed to move quickly and quietly. He bypassed his own secure communications team and headed for a small, hardened sensitive compartmented information facility, SCGEF. In the basement, a room known to only a few and shielded from all forms of electronic eavesdropping. He brought Ava with him, flanked by 2 of his most trusted personal guards. She was no longer a detainee. She was a strategic asset. Inside the SCAF, a sterile room filled with a low hum of servers, Vance initiated a secure video call on a closed network. He was contacting a retired vice admiral, a man named Peterson, one of the only other living souls who knew the truth about the Night Owl unit. As he waited for the call to connect, a new figure appeared at the SIF's entrance. Commander Thorne, a man in his late 40s, with a reputation for being a rigid, by-the-book officer. He was the base's executive officer, a gatekeeper of protocol and procedure. General Vance, sir, Thorne said, his posture ramrod straight, but his eyes holding a challenging glint. I was alerted to a security lockdown in this wing. As the base XO, I need to know the nature of the situation. The situation is classified, Commander, Vance replied coolly, not taking his eyes off the screen. With all due respect, sir, Thorne pressed, stepping further into the room, his gaze flicking to Ava. This facility requires specific clearance, which this civilian does not possess. Her presence here is a serious breach of protocol. Her clearance is my authority, Commander, Vance said, his voice dropping a full octave. And my authority is not a matter for discussion. A flicker of something, annoyance, or perhaps something more calculated, crossed Thorne's face. Sir, the regulations are clear. I must insist that. You will insist on nothing, Commander, Vance cut in, finally turning to face him. The full force of his 4-star command presence hit Thorne like a physical wave. You will return to your post, and you will forget you saw anything here. Is that understood? Thorne's jaw tightened. For a moment, it seemed he might argue further, a shocking breach of military etiquette. He held Vance's gaze for a fraction too long before finally, reluctantly, acquiescing. Understood, General. He gave a stiff nod, turned on his heel, and left. Vance watched him go, a new, cold suspicion forming in his mind. Thorne's insistence felt like more than just bureaucratic rigidity. It felt like an attempt to obstruct, to gather information. The screen in front of him flickered to life, revealing the weathered face of Vice Admiral Peterson. Harrison, Peterson said, his voice raspy. It's been a long time. This had better be important. It is, Vance said grimly. Nightingale has come in from the cold. Peterson's eyes widened in shock. Vance quickly briefed him on the situation. Ava's reappearance, the warning about hello, the threat of a compromised command. As they spoke, one of Vance's guards entered the SCF, his face grim. He handed the general a tablet. Sir, this just came over the wire. An incident aboard the USS Vigilance. Vance took the tablet. His blood ran cold as he read the preliminary report. A chief petty officer had suffered a fatal accident during a routine maintenance check in a remote part of the ship. He had apparently slipped and fallen overboard. Search and rescue operations were underway, but he was presumed lost. The sailor's name was Michael Vance. Code name, Hello. The news of Michael Hello Vance's death hit the sterile confines of the SCIF like a shockwave. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a confirmation, a brutal, unequivocal message. Ava, who had been standing silently in the corner, saw the look on the general's face and knew. She stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. They got to him. General Vance lowered the tablet, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. They didn't just get to him. They did it less than an hour after you were taken into custody. The timing is too perfect. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer just clicking into place. They were forming a horrifying mosaic. Ava's arrest had been the trigger. The moment her identity was flagged by the system, the enemy had been alerted. They had moved instantly to eliminate the loose end she was trying to protect. Michael's death wasn't an accident. It was an execution. Whoever is behind this, Vance said, his voice a low growl. They're inside our communications loop. They knew we'd identify you. They knew you were a threat. And they're cleaning house. The secure room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The enemy wasn't just some ghost from the past. They were an active, intelligent, and utterly ruthless force operating within the Navy's own walls. Commander Thorne, Ava said suddenly, her mind making a swift, intuitive leap. Is challenging you at the door. It wasn't just about protocol. Vance nodded grimly. He was probing, trying to confirm if I knew who you were, trying to gauge the threat level. The situation had escalated dramatically. This was no longer about uncovering a past betrayal. It was about surviving an active purge. Ava was not just a witness to a cold case. She was the next target on a kill list. "We're out of time," Vance said, his strategic mind kicking into high gear. "They'll be coming for you next. They'll try to make it look like an accident, or frame you for Michael's death, or simply make you disappear. We have to move you, and we have to go on the offensive." He ended the call with Peterson, giving him a quick, coded instruction. Then he turned to Ava. "Your life, as Ava Thorne, is over. As of this moment, you are back under my command. You are Nightingale again." A fire ignited in Ava's eyes, a look he hadn't seen since the streets of Mogadishu. The quiet, watchful civilian was gone, replaced by the operator she had been trained to be. "What's the mission, General?" "The mission is to draw them out," Vance declared. "They think they're hunting a ghost. We're going to make that ghost hunt them." He knew it was a desperate gamble. He was about to use a living, breathing person as bait, placing her directly in the crosshairs of a powerful, unknown enemy. But it was the only move he had left. The game had turned lethal, and the threat was no longer distant or theoretical. It was here now and closing in fast. The only way to survive was to turn and fight. To an outside observer, the emergency hearing convened in a secure, soundproof chamber at Naval Base Coronado looked like a standard disciplinary proceeding. The official reason for the hearing was to address the serious allegations against the civilian, Ava Thorne, for impersonating a federal officer and fraudulent use of military insignia. But for General Vance and Ava, it was a baited trap. The room was cold, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table. A panel of 3 stern-faced admirals, handpicked by Vance for their integrity, but kept in the dark about the true purpose of the meeting, sat as judges. Across from them sat Ava, flanked by a JAG Corps lawyer who had been given a simple, direct order by Vance. Keep her quiet. Let them talk. The Navy's lead prosecutor, a commander named Jennings with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, began the proceedings. He laid out the case with theatrical precision, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. "We have before us a clear and egregious case of stolen valor," Jennings began, pacing before the panel. "This woman, Ava Thorne, has no record of service. None. Yet she brazenly paraded herself at a public event, wearing the sacred trident of our most elite warriors. A symbol men have died to earn." He projected documents onto a large screen. Ava's clean civilian record, the report from the MPs, the sworn statement from Marcus Cole. It was a neat, tidy package of condemnation. Ava sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table in front of her. She endured the prosecutor's scornful gaze and the panel's skeptical scrutiny without flinching. Her expression was neutral, a mask of calm that seemed to infuriate Jennings even more. To him, her silence was arrogance. To Vance, watching from a small, adjoining observation room, it was discipline. She was playing her part perfectly. "We have reason to believe Ms. Thorne may be suffering from delusions," Jennings continued, shifting his line of attack. "She has offered no explanation for her actions, no remorse. She is a fantasist, a con artist who has spat on the honor of every man and woman who has ever worn this uniform." The pressure in the room was immense. The admirals on the panel looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. They saw a troubled woman, a liar caught in a pathetic fantasy. This was the narrative the enemy wanted. They wanted her discredited, dismissed as mentally unstable, making her an easy target for a quiet, off-the-books disappearance. The JAG lawyer played his role, offering weak objections that were easily overruled. The trap was being set. The enemy, Vance knew, will be monitoring this hearing. They would see their plan working flawlessly. They would see Ava isolated, undefended, and officially branded fraud. They would believe she was vulnerable. "Does the defendant have anything to say for herself?" the presiding admiral asked, his voice heavy with disapproval. Ava looked at her lawyer, who gave a slight shake of his head. "The defendant reserves her statement, Admiral," the lawyer said. A murmur went through the room. It was an admission of guilt, as far as they were concerned. Jennings smiled, a thin, predatory smile. He was about to move for a recommendation of federal prosecution. The trap was about to spring shut on Ava. And that's when General Vance chose to walk into the room. His entrance was unannounced. The door opened, and he simply stepped inside, his 4-star rank sucking the air out of the chamber. The prosecutor stopped mid-sentence. The admirals on the panel sat bolt upright. General Vance, the presiding admiral said, his voice filled with shock. "We were not aware you would be joining us." "I'm not here to join you, Admiral," Vance said, his voice calm and resonant. "I'm here as a witness. For the defense." The hearing room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Commander Jennings, the prosecutor, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. The idea of the commander of the Pacific Fleet testifying for a woman accused of faking a military identity was beyond comprehension. It was a move so far off the chessboard it broke the game. "A witness, General," the presiding admiral finally managed to ask, his voice strained. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that this entire proceeding is based on a lie," Vance stated, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on the panel. "Not a lie told by Ms. Thorne, but a lie told by us, by the United States Navy." He walked slowly toward the witness stand, his presence commanding the full and undivided attention of everyone in the room. He did not wait to be sworn in. "The woman you know as Ava Thorne," he began, his voice ringing with an authority that could not be questioned, "was once an operative under my direct command. Her code name was Nightingale. She was a member of a joint task force so secret, its existence was denied at every level of government. That unit was called the Night Owl Unit." A wave of shock rippled through the room. The admirals on the panel exchanged bewildered glances. This was not just a defense. It was a bombshell, a revelation of classified information that could end a career. "The tattoo on her forearm is not a fake," Vance continued, his voice unwavering. "It is the unit's mark, awarded only to those who completed its brutal initiation and survived its missions. She earned it. She earned it in blood and sacrifice in places you will never see on a map." He turned his gaze on Jennings. "You speak of stolen valor, Commander. The only valor being stolen here is hers. Stolen by a government that asked her to serve in the darkest shadows and then erased her existence to protect its secrets." Jennings, recovering from his shock, scrambled to his feet. "Admiral, this is an unsubstantiated claim. There are no records, no files. Because I ordered them destroyed." Vance thundered, his voice cracking like a whip. "I ordered the records scrubbed after the unit was compromised and disbanded. It was done to protect the lives of the surviving operators, including Nightingale. It was a decision I made to keep them safe from the very people who betrayed them." He pulled a small, leather-bound journal from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table before the panel. "This is my personal log from that period. It was kept off the official record. It details every mission, every operator, including Nightingale. It is my testimony." He then looked directly at Ava, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "She did not parade herself at Fleet Week. She was executing a mission. She was trying to warn me that an old enemy was active again, that another surviving member of her unit was in danger. A man who was murdered on his ship less than 12 hours ago." The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place. The hearing was no longer about stolen valor. It was about conspiracy, betrayal, and murder at the highest levels of the Navy. Vance's testimony had done more than defend Ava. It had turned the hearing into a weapon. He had knowingly and willingly risked court-martial and disgrace to expose a truth he could no longer allow to remain buried. He had laid a new trap, not for Ava, but for the powerful, unseen enemy who had orchestrated the cover-up. By revealing the existence of Night Owl and his personal log, he had created a new thread for investigators to pull, a thread that would lead directly to them. The presiding admiral, his face pale, looked from the general's journal to Ava, seeing her for the first time not as a fraud, but as a soldier. He struck his gavel on the table. "This hearing is suspended," he declared, his voice heavy. "All materials are now considered classified at the highest level. This room is sealed." The game had changed. The hunter had become the hunted. The fallout from General Vance's testimony was a silent earthquake that shook the foundations of Naval Command. The unofficial hearing triggered an official, highly classified internal investigation led by a small, trusted team from the Department of Defense. Vance's personal logs, combined with the evidence of Michael "Hello" Vance's murder, provided an undeniable trail. The investigation swiftly uncovered a conspiracy orchestrated by a high-ranking intelligence officer who had been selling operational intel for years. Commander Thorne, the by-the-book XO, was his inside man, feeding him information and running interference. The officer had orchestrated the original betrayal of the Night Owl unit in Somalia to cover his tracks and had been hunting the survivors ever since. Ava's reappearance was the final, desperate threat he had to extinguish. Within weeks, both men were quietly arrested, stripped of their rank, and disappeared into the clandestine world of military justice, their treason never to be made public. Ava's identity was unofficially restored within a classified world. Her file, once a blank page, was repopulated with a history of heroism that would never be celebrated with a parade. She was offered a new, protected identity and a quiet life, or a position back in the shadows. The story ends on a cool, overcast morning. Ava stands before the polished black granite of a memorial wall at a quiet, secluded military cemetery. The wall is etched with the names of thousands who died in service. She is dressed not in a faded hoodie, but in a simple, dark jacket, her posture straight and proud. General Vance walks up and stands beside her. They look at the wall together in comfortable silence for a long moment. "His name isn't here," Ava says quietly, speaking of Michael. "None of their names are." "No," Vance replies, his voice somber. "Officially, they never existed. There are no medals for them, no flags for their families. Their sacrifice is silent." He turns to her. "But it's not forgotten. Not by you. Not by me. That is their memorial." Ava reaches out and traces a name on the wall. A random soldier she never knew. "They all deserve to be remembered." "They do," Vance agrees. He places a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. "Justice is not always loud, Ava. Sometimes it's just a quiet truth that survives. You survived. You are their legacy." She nods, a sense of peace finally settling over her. She is no longer a ghost, haunted by a past she couldn't name. She is a guardian of a silent history, a living testament to the unheralded courage of the forgotten. As she turns to walk away from the wall, the sun breaks through the clouds, catching the glint of the trident on her forearm. It is not a secret to be hidden, but a badge of honor to be carried. The camera holds on her determined figure walking into the light, strong and resilient. A message appears on the screen. Ava's story reminds us that the greatest heroes are often the ones whose names we will never know. In the comments below, share your thoughts on the meaning of silent sacrifice and the courage of unsung heroes. Please comment with respect. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story.